once. Once. I was up there.
The air show had drawn thousands. The sun was bright. The sky, a flawless blue canvas, stretched wide above the airfield. Children tugged at their parents' hands, pointing at the gleaming fighters. Parked on the tarmac, vendors sold flags and hats. The smell of popcorn, jet fuel, and hot asphalt mixed strangely in the late morning air. It was the kind of day where excitement itself seemed to hum. Every few minutes, engines roared to life, and the ground trembled as aircraft climbed into the sky. The crowd gasped, cheered, clapped. Cameras clicked, phones tilted upward, catching flashes of silver wings cutting through sunlight. The announcer's voice boomed through loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the thunder of freedom. And with that, another formation streaked past, tails trailing smoke in red, white, and blue. The audience erupted. Amid the sea of faces, one figure stood out, not because of brilliance, but because of contrast. He was slow, deliberate, a step out of rhythm with the energy around him. An old man. His frame was thin, his back slightly bent, but there was still a trace of straightness in his shoulders, as though his body remembered discipline even when time no longer allowed it. He wore a faded military jacket, too heavy for the warm day. On his head sat a cap, its fabric frayed, the embroidery nearly worn away. If one leaned close, the words could still be read, U.S. Air Force. First, no one noticed him. He blended into the movement of the crowd. He shuffled to an empty seat near the edge of the bleachers, lowering himself carefully, wincing as his knees bent. For a while, he sat still, hands folded atop a walking stick, eyes fixed upward toward the sky. But then laughter. A group of teenagers, perhaps too young to know better, pointed in his direction. One nudged another, smirking. "Check him out," one whispered, not as quietly as he thought. "Look at Grandpa over there. Thinks he's Top Gun or something." The others chuckled. Another boy cupped his hands like a microphone. "Attention, ladies and gentlemen. Retired fighter ace incoming. Hide your planes." The laughter spilled louder. A few adults glanced over but said nothing. The old veteran didn't move at first. He simply blinked behind his glasses, eyes clouded but still sharp beneath the surface. His lips pressed together. He was used to it, perhaps. The jokes, the dismissals, the sense of being a relic in a world too fast to care about the past. Yet still, it hurt. Another passerby joined in. "Hey, old-timer, you gonna fly today?" The group laughed again. The veteran's hand tightened slightly on his walking stick. His other hand brushed the edge of his cap, as though steadying it against a storm that only he could feel. The camera, if this were a film, would zoom in close. His face was worn, lines etched deep from years of wind and worry. But there was something unbroken in his expression, something almost defiant. His eyes, pale, watery, yet still alive, lifted to the sky. The jets above shrieked in tight formation, sunlight flashing off their wings. The crowd cheered wildly. The old man's gaze didn't waver. His lips moved silently. Perhaps he was counting the maneuvers, perhaps whispering a call sign long forgotten by the world. Behind the noise of mockery and laughter, there was another story written in his silence. He had walked through hangars where the smell of oil and steel was thicker than breath. He had strapped into cockpits where the hum of instruments felt like a heartbeat. He had lifted off runways not for applause, but for missions where the return was never guaranteed. None of that was known to the crowd. To them, he was just an old man in an outdated jacket, a symbol of something past, something they believed had no place in the excitement of today. One of the teenagers, emboldened, shouted louder this time, "Hey, Grandpa, do you even know what an A-10 is?" The group burst into laughter again. The veteran turned his head slowly, meeting their eyes for the first time. For a brief second, the smirks faltered. There was no anger in his gaze, no sharp retort waiting on his lips, only something quiet, a kind of sadness, tempered by dignity. It was the look of someone who had seen mockery before, someone who had heard gunfire closer than laughter, and who knew the weight of silence after a mission when not everyone returned. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back toward the runway, his eyes following the line of the horizon. And in that simple act, ignoring them, holding his focus steady, he seemed taller somehow, stronger even in frailty. The crowd's laughter blended back into cheers as another aircraft performed a daring climb. For most, the old man was forgotten again, buried beneath spectacle. But a few, sitting nearby, noticed the tears forming at the corners of his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. They weren't tears of weakness. They were memories, surfacing with every roar of the engines above. If one listened closely, beneath the thunder of the air show, one might hear the whisper of his heart. Once, I was up there, and though the world around him mocked, though the young dismissed him, though history itself seemed to have erased his name, inside him the sky still remembered. The scene lingers here. The camera does not cut quickly. It holds on the veteran's face, on the wrinkle of pride against sorrow, on the quiet defiance written into his posture. The mockery has been delivered, the humiliation done. But the story has only begun, because the sky he once owned, was about to answer in a way no one could predict. The roar of the jets overhead faded, and with it, the old man's mind slipped backward in time. The crowd, the laughter, the sharp sting of mockery, it all dissolved. What remained was memory, a memory as vivid as the day it was lived. The year was long ago, but in his mind it was yesterday. The heat of the desert. Sun burned on his skin. The air was thick with dust, gunpowder, and the iron taste of fear. The runway stretched out before him, black asphalt shimmering in the heat haze. Engines screamed in the distance. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men were fighting. Men were dying. He was young then, strong, striding toward the aircraft with a purpose that burned in his veins. The A-10 Thunderbolt. His machine, his partner, his weapon, his shield, waited for him like a sleeping beast. Its shark-toothed nose cones seemed to grin at him, promising both death and salvation. He reached up, ran a gloved hand across the fuselage. The skin of the aircraft was hot, vibrating faintly with power. "Easy, girl," he whispered, as though speaking to a living creature. For him, she was alive. Every pilot knew it. The A-10 wasn't just steel. She was a companion. She carried you through hell, and if you were lucky, she brought you back. His call sign, painted just below the cockpit, Canopy, gleamed in the harsh sun. It was short, sharp, unforgettable. A name whispered on radios. A name cursed by enemies. A name spoken with respect in briefing rooms. He climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and the world changed. Switches clicked. Gauges hummed. The canopy sealed shut with a heavy thud. Suddenly the noise of the bass dulled, replaced by the rhythm of machines, the voice of instruments, the heartbeat of war. Ghost One, cleared for takeoff. The voice in his headset was calm, official, but he felt the weight of what it meant. He pushed the throttle. The beast roared awake. The A-10 lunged forward, wheels hammering the runway, until suddenly release. The ground fell away. The sky took him. The mission that day was like so many others, simple on paper, deadly in reality. Troops pinned down. Enemy armor advancing. It was his job to stop them. He banked low, wings slicing air so sharp it whined against the fuselage. The terrain rushed. Beneath him, dust, fire, black smoke curling into the sky. And then tracers. Thin red lines cutting upward, angry sparks searching for him. The sound of anti-aircraft guns thudded in his chest. He felt it before he heard it. The shudder of metal struck by metal. His plane groaned, shook violently. Warning lights flashed across the console. He grit his teeth, forcing the beast to obey, forcing himself not to panic. Stay with me, he muttered. But there was no time to nurse wounds. Below, men in uniform, his men were under fire. He could see them huddled behind. Broken walls, gunfire flashing all around. They were ants against giants. Tanks grinding forward, shells ripping the earth apart. He dove. The A-10s screamed downward, the Gu-8 cannon beneath him. Spinning, spitting fire. The sound was a growl that shook the ground. A sound no one ever forgot once they heard it. BRRRRT. Armor split open like paper. Enemy tanks burst into flame. Men scattered, running for cover. The radio crackled. Ghost One, you're saving our skin. Keep hitting them. He did. Again and again, diving, firing, pulling up through sheets of smoke only to circle and dive. Again. Each pass a gamble. Each second in range a chance for death. And then, the inevitable. A scream in his headset. A voice cut short. One of his wingmen, Ghost 2, hit. The explosion blossomed. In the sky like a burning sun. The shock punched him in the chest harder than any missile ever could. He wanted to shout. He wanted to turn, to search, to deny what his eyes had just seen. But training forced him forward. There were still men alive below who needed him. And so he swallowed the grief like poison, pushed the throttle and kept firing. That night, back at base, the weight hit him, the empty bunk, the missing laughter, the absence of a voice on the radio, one less brother in arms. It was always like that. Each mission gave something. Each mission took something away. But his call sign remained. It grew heavier with every sortie, every scar on his aircraft, every scar in his soul. You didn't just earn a call sign, you carried it. And his was carried with respect. Among his squadron, he became a legend. The one who dove lower, stayed longer, who brought fire on targets when others would have pulled away. He flew like a ghost, slipping through flak, striking with precision, and somehow, again and again, returning alive. Ghost One, they whispered. He's untouchable. But he knew the truth. No one was untouchable. Every mission was a borrowed chance. Every sunrise was a gift. Years passed. The war ground on. Faces came and went. Some lived, some didn't. And then, one day, it ended. No dramatic speech. No thunderous finale. Just silence. Orders came. The squadron disbanded. The aircraft reassigned. The pilots went home, some to families, some to loneliness, some to graves. And Ghost One, he packed his duffel bag, saluted the flag, and boarded a plane that carried him not into battle, but into obscurity. No parade waited for him. No banners. No crowd chanting his name. Only quiet streets. Only the slow march of days. Only a world too eager to forget. Back in the present, the air show roared on. Children cheered. Teenagers laughed. Jets tore the sky apart with speed and smoke. And the old man, once Ghost One, once the name enemies feared and comrades trusted, sat alone on the bleachers, mocked, dismissed, invisible. The call sign that once echoed across radios and battlefields was now just a ghost itself, carried only in his heart. No one remembered, no one except him. But the sky never forgets. And soon it would speak his name again. The day pressed on. The sun stood higher now, throwing sharp light across the runway, making every aircraft gleam like steel caught on fire. The crowd cheered louder with each maneuver. Jets screamed, smoke trailed, hearts raced. But for the old man, seated quietly at the edge of the bleachers, time felt heavy. The memories of war clung to him like a shadow that refused to lift. He sat still, worn hands folded on his cane, eyes fixed on the horizon as though waiting for something. The laughter of those who mocked him earlier had faded into the noise of the show. They had found new distractions, merchandise booths, food stalls, a stunt team looping overhead. To them, he was already forgotten. A momentary joke, nothing more. But not to the sky. Because high above, a squadron was forming. The announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and excited. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves. It is time for the warhorse of the battlefield, the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The crowd erupted. Children screamed with delight. Veterans in the audience sat straighter. Even the casual spectators leaned forward. The A-10 was no sleek, modern fighter. It was bulky, rugged, ugly in design, and yet beautiful in purpose. Soldiers called it the Warthog, but those who knew, they called it salvation. Engines rumbled in the distance, deep and thunderous. The ground itself seemed to tremble as four gray shapes appeared, low against the horizon. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. Straight wings, twin tails, engines mounted high. Like clenched fists, the crowd roared. Phones rose into the air. "Here they come!" someone shouted. The A-10s approached in tight formation, sunlight flashing off their canopies. They flew low, so low the vibration rattled the bleachers. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a memory carved into the bones of anyone who had ever stood on a battlefield and prayed for cover fire. The old man's breath caught. His fingers trembled against his cane. Every muscle in his body seemed to tighten, recognizing a sound his soul could never forget. The A-10s swept overhead. For a moment, they were just a display, another act in the show. But then, something shifted. The lead pilot's voice crackled through the private squadron frequency, unheard by the crowd.
Formation Delta.
Prepare to write. It was a signal, brief and precise, and every pilot in the group understood. They banked, engines howling, wings slicing the air with brutal grace. Trails of white smoke poured. Behind them, drawing lines against the vast blue canvas of the sky. At first, the crowd didn't understand. The lines seemed random, twisting arcs that had no pattern. Spectators squinted, puzzled. Some assumed it was just another stunt. But slowly, letter by letter, the shape began to emerge. Gasps rippled through the stands. Children pointed. Adults shaded their eyes. The smoke was forming. Words. And in the bleachers, the old man froze. His heart pounded, louder than the roar of engines. He blinked once, twice, trying to believe what he was seeing. There, written across the sky, in thick white smoke trailing behind the A-10s, was a name. A call sign. His call sign. Ghost One. The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with shock. Murmurs spread. People leaned toward one another, whispering, "Who's Ghost One? What does that mean? Why would they write that?" Eyes turned, searching for the one who seemed suddenly connected to the impossible tribute unfolding above. And then, they found him, the frail old man in the faded jacket, the one who had been mocked, the one who had sat silently, eyes fixed on the sky, as though waiting for this exact moment. He didn't move, couldn't move. Tears blurred his vision, but he refused to look away. The letters blazed against the blue sky, vast and undeniable. Not just smoke, not just a show. It was recognition. It was memory made visible. It was the past refusing to stay buried. One of the teenagers who had mocked him earlier gasped audibly. "Wait, that's him?" Another boy whispered, "No way, that can't be real." But the truth was written above their heads, bold and unerasable. The announcer's voice faltered, then returned, filled with a weight it hadn't carried before. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you see in the sky is no ordinary stunt. It is a tribute to a man sitting among you today. A man whose service, whose courage, whose name once echoed across battlefields. That name is Ghost One." The crowd fell into silence. A silence so deep it swallowed the noise of engines, the shouts, even the rustle of flags in the wind. All eyes fixed on the old veteran. He bowed his head, not in shame but in reverence, for the brothers who had not returned, for the voices silenced long ago, for the missions, carried out in shadows, never meant for glory, only for survival. Slowly, he raised a trembling hand, 2 fingers to his forehead in a salute. Not to himself, but to the sky. The formation above dipped their wings in reply, and in that instant, the mockery of moments before was obliterated. The laughter, the jokes, the dismissal, they were nothing now. Nothing compared to the thunder of engines honoring him, nothing compared to the name painted across the heavens. Ghost One was no ghost today. He was flesh and blood, a living legend. The crowd erupted, this time not with derision, but with applause. It began as a ripple, uncertain, almost hesitant, and then it grew, swelling into thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting. Some saluted. Others wept openly. The teenagers who had mocked him earlier stood frozen, their faces pale, their bravado gone. One of them, barely audible, whispered, We laughed at a hero." But the old man wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the sky, his lips moving silently once more, speaking the names of the ones who had flown with him, the ones who had never landed. Ghost 2, Ghost 3, Ghost 4. The sky answered with the roar of engines. And for the first time in decades, his call sign wasn't just a memory. It was alive again. The engines thundered overhead. The crowd, moments before roaring with laughter and chatter, froze where they stood. All eyes lifted. All voices fell silent. At first, it was just smoke, thin, white trails stretching across the endless blue. But then, like a hand guided by memory itself, the lines bent. They curved. They joined. A single letter appeared. Then another. And another. The sound of jet engines rattled through the air as the smoke slowly formed into words. Not random, not accidental, but deliberate, precise, undeniable. HAWKEYE. The old man's call sign. Gasps rippled through the grandstands. Children clutched their parents' arms. Veterans in the audience, men who knew the language of the sky, stood straighter, their faces pale. Someone whispered, "That's a call sign." Another voice trembled, "It's his." Those who had mocked him only minutes before were now rooted in place, shame burning hot beneath their skin. The old jokes, the cruel laughter, they shattered, fragile as glass, beneath the weight of what they were seeing, because the sky itself was telling the truth. The veteran lifted his eyes. For a moment, his body seemed to forget the weight of years. His shoulders straightened. His chest rose. The dull ache in his bones faded beneath the surge of something he had not felt in decades. Recognition. Tears blurred his vision, but he did not look away. He let them fall freely, silver against the lines of his weathered face. His lips moved, whispering names. Not his own. Never his own. Jackson, Miller, Davis. Each name a ghost. Each name a brother. Each letter in the smoke above was not for him alone. It was for them. For the ones who never came home. The crowd, sensing it, remained silent. Silence deeper than any announcer's voice, deeper than the roar of engines. The silence of reverence, of understanding dawning all at once. The A-10s circled overhead, wings cutting sunlight into shards. Their smoke trailed like ribbons of memory, like hands, reaching down from the heavens themselves. One jet dipped its wings in salute. Another followed, and another. For birds in total, flying a formation older than most of the crowd had ever seen. The missing man maneuver. Veterans in the audience felt their throats tighten. Some raised trembling hands to their brows in salute. Others bowed their heads. They knew what it meant. One plane broke formation, climbing alone, soaring upward toward the sun. The others held steady, their trails weaving the letters of his call sign tighter, bolder, brighter. Hawkeye. The old veteran gripped the railing in front of him. His fingers shook, not from weakness, but from the flood of memories. He remembered the first time he'd flown the Warthog, the missions, the losses, the moments where life and death hung by a thread. And now, decades later, he was being honored not by medals, not by speeches, but by the very machine that had once carried him into fire. The machine that had been his voice, his shield, his companion in the darkest hours. The A-10s, the Warthogs, they hadn't forgotten, and neither had the pilots who now carried the torch. A child in the stands tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, who is he?" The man swallowed hard before answering. His voice was soft, but filled with something close to awe. "He's someone who gave us the sky we stand under. Someone we should have thanked long ago. The veteran's eyes never left the heavens. His lips kept moving, whispering, not prayers, no, memories, promises, words carried upward to the smoke-drawn letters. Brothers, they remember us. We are not lost, not forgotten. His knees weakened. For a moment it seemed he might fall. But then, two younger men in uniform, active pilots, moved quickly to his side. They didn't ask. They didn't speak. They simply stood with him, supporting him, saluting the name etched across the sky. And in that instant the crowd understood. The laughter that had mocked his faded uniform now burned like shame in their chests. They saw not a frail old man, but a giant wrapped in flesh and time. They saw a warrior who had carried the weight of lives, who had written his name not in ink or stone, but in the thunder of engines and the smoke of battle. And now, in front of them all, the sky itself bore witness. The jets began their final pass. The letters lingered, glowing white against the blue, slowly drifting, as though written by hands that belonged to the past itself. The old man raised his trembling hand to his brow. His voice, cracked but steady, whispered a single word, "Salute." The crowd rose, every man, every woman, every child. They stood, hats removed, hands pressed to hearts or raised in salute. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the fading thunder of engines and the quiet sobs of those who finally understood. For the first time in decades, Hawkeye did not feel invisible. He felt seen, not as a relic, not as a joke, but as what he had always been, a protector, pilot, a brother to the fallen. And as the smoke slowly dissolved into the wind, he knew the truth. They were gone, but their names lived on. He was old, but not forgotten. The sky had written it for all to see. The smoke in the sky began to fade, carried gently by the breeze, dissolving into wisps of memory. Yet no one moved. No one dared to break the silence that hung heavy across the airfield. It was as if the entire crowd, thousands of people, were holding their breath, afraid that even a whisper might erase the sacred letters that had just blazed across the heavens. Hawkeye, the call sign of a man they had mocked, dismissed, and overlooked. The veteran lowered his hand from his salute. His arm trembled, but his eyes still shone. For the first time in years, those eyes weren't clouded by loneliness. They were filled with something brighter, something he thought he'd never feel again. Honor. Around him, children tugged at their parents, asking questions. Fathers and mothers bent down, explaining with soft voices, pointing toward the sky. The story spread like wildfire, from one mouth to another. He was a pilot. He flew the A-10. He saved lives. And suddenly, the man who had been invisible was now larger than life. A teenager, one of the boys who had laughed the loudest earlier, stepped forward. His sneakers scuffed against the concrete as he approached the old man. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his mouth struggling for words. I'm sorry, sir." His voice cracked. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." The veteran looked at him for a long moment. The boy's apology hung trembling in the air. Then, with a slow nod, the old man answered, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with quiet dignity. "Respect," he said softly, his voice carrying more weight than thunder. "It doesn't come from medals or uniforms. It comes from knowing what was given. So you could stand here today." The boy swallowed hard, and tears pricked his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak, but in that nod, promise was made. The announcer, who had once filled the air with booming enthusiasm for acrobatics and stunts, found his microphone heavy in his hands. His voice, when it finally returned, was hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, today, we witnessed more than a performance. We witnessed history. We witnessed gratitude written across the sky. Let us never forget the price that was paid, nor the heroes who bore it." Applause erupted. Not the wild, careless cheers of an air show, but slow, steady clapping. A rhythm that grew stronger, deeper, until the stands shook with the sound of respect. The veteran closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. Each clap was not for him alone. It was for Jackson, for Miller, for Davis, for all of them, his brothers in the sky. As the crowd slowly dispersed, families carried with them more than just photos and souvenirs. They carried a story, a lesson. One father lifted his son onto his shoulders and whispered, "Never laugh at a uniform, son. Never. Behind every patch, every faded cap, there's a story you can't see. A story you may never understand. But it deserves your respect." The boy nodded, his small hands gripping tighter, as if holding on to something too important to lose. The veteran, now standing quietly by the railing, felt a hand on his shoulder. It was one of the A-10 pilots, helmet tucked under his arm, flight suit gleaming in the sunlight. "Sir," the young man said, voice steady but eyes misted. "We drew that name for you, because we still fly in your shadow. Everything we do, it's because you showed us how." The old man's lips trembled. He wanted to reply, but words failed. Instead, he simply grasped the pilot's hand with all the strength he had left. And in that handshake, the past and present bridged, unbroken. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon gold. The veteran turned once more to the sky. The letters were gone now, swallowed by the wind, but in his heart, they blazed brighter than ever. He whispered one last time, "Not for the crowd, not for the pilots, not even for himself. For you, brothers, always." And as he walked away, cane tapping against the ground, the lesson remained behind him. Etched not in smoke, not in applause, but in the hearts of every person who had seen the sky speak that day. Respect, honor, memory. 3 things that should never fade, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many wars are forgotten. And if you're listening to this story right now, remember it doesn't end here. Somewhere near you, there's a veteran, quiet, unseen, carrying the weight of history in their eyes. Don't wait for the sky to write their names. Look closer, ask their story, and give them the respect they deserve, because heroes don't ask to be remembered. It is we who must never forget.